Good morning, everyone. Glad to have you here. Like I said a little bit ago, our service today, we're going to be reframing religion in general. So that means we're going to be reframing a little bit about how we view our own religion and how we view other religions. And I wanted to start talking about what it was like for me growing up. I think, who was a church kid growing up? Who went to church most of their life, if not all of their life, every Sunday with their parents every week? Who enjoyed it? Okay, less. I saw less hands, but that's okay. That's okay. No judgment, because I was a church kid who got dropped off at church so my dad could go golfing. So I went to Sunday school and church with people at church, and then my dad would pick me up after his 9 holes were done. But anyway, growing up in church, I didn't see a lot of churches cooperating together. I didn't see a lot of churches doing things together or organizing events together or having services together. There was a few here and there, but it wasn't a lot. It was mostly your own church, your own local church in your building that you kept to yourself, right? And then people who left your church for another church, there was a term for that. Do you remember what that is? Anybody heard of that phrase before? Church hopping, sheep stealing. Have you heard that one before? It's the thing where, like sometimes people go to like the bigger church in town because there's more for them to do, there's more activities, more services, better music or whatever. So church hopping was a thing that people did sometimes. But this is all just within the context of Christianity. Hold on one second, my iPad's not working. Imagine that. We'll do this, okay. So sometimes megachurches got a bad rap because people would go to the bigger churches in town rather than your small church if you grew up in a small one, because there was more for them to do. But was the megachurch taking people? Not necessarily. People just sometimes want bigger or more attractional things. But because of this, I think smaller churches, like the one that I grew up in, had a kind of a scarcity mindset. Have you heard of scarcity versus abundance mindsets? So let's use an example to talk about this. So if you have a scarcity or abundant mindset, basically, if you have a friend who comes to you and says, hey, I just got a new job and it pays a lot more money, would you be excited for them or would you be jealous of them? And that's kind of the difference between scarcity and abundance. So if you have an abundant mindset, you're excited for your friend because it doesn't affect your life at all. They didn't get a job that you were trying to get, so it's just something good that they enjoy. If you have a scarcity mindset, you may not like it because you didn't get it even though you weren't applying for the job. Sometimes siblings, like my own, have a scarcity mindset. So maybe if you have a sibling who is always jealous of something good that happens to you, they have a scarcity mindset. But churches can also have these mindsets. So churches can sometimes feel that because someone's left or there's a family that was really involved and then they're not, that something happened or there's something wrong, instead of just being excited for that family as they move forward in whatever their faith journey is. And it's hard as a church, especially a small church, when you see numbers dwindling, maybe after a pandemic, and you see like, oh, things are not as good as they used to be. It's hard to have an abundant mindset that God is going to do good things. But I think that's a healthier approach. I think it's going to create better opportunities for ministry when you're not scared of people leaving or bad things happening. Make sense? Yeah? Okay. So I think we need to reframe a little bit using an abundant mindset. How can we apply that to how we view religion, how we can view other religions with an abundant mindset rather than a scarcity mindset, rather than people being stolen or taking away or sheep stealing or church hopping? How can we view a different way of that? So there's a term I want to use. It's not something I've made up. I'm sure you've seen it around, especially when tragedy strikes, these words pop up. Interfaith. Have you heard of the word interfaith? It's sometimes in colleges there's interfaith groups where different groups of people from different religions get together and have dialogue. I think this is beautiful and it's wonderful, and I think especially like after 9/11 we saw a lot of interfaith dialogue in New York City. There was lots of Muslims and a lot of Jewish folk and a lot of Christians that came together to combine resources to help the community that was in need. And I think that's beautiful. I think that this is really good, and I think it happens a lot in tragedy, but it doesn't happen a lot outside of that unless it's an intentional attempt to create dialogue. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint back, because we need to move on to the next slide. Here we go. So I think there's a lot of groups around the world that are promoting interfaith dialogue and interfaith exchanges. And I found a lot of YouTube videos as I was doing research for this sermon that talked about that. There's lots of groups that promote religious tolerance and religious association between groups, because I think that sometimes after years and years of history of violence and hatred towards other groups, it's beautiful to see groups coming together after years of pain. But it doesn't always happen. I think there's a healthy way to do the dialogue and reframing religion, and it has to do a lot with how Christians proselytize, how we use the Great Commission to sometimes, like a sales pitch, basically. Sometimes Christians seem like salesmen. They're trying to sell Christianity to other people who may not be Christian or have another faith. And sometimes we proselytize in order to get people in. And that can stop dialogue pretty quick. If you're going to buy a car and the salesman's real pushy, that makes me like back away. When you meet a Christian who's real pushy about them coming to your church or wanting to be involved, or especially when before we started Shade Tree and before we even lived in Ohio, when we were in Kentucky, we were just going to a church in Kentucky that heard that I had a degree in youth ministry, and you could see everyone's ears perk up because like, oh, a free volunteer who has experience, right? So Christians sometimes use skills or talents as opportunities to kind of bring people in, right? Instead of just letting people be a part of the community, they want them. Right? It's a sale. It feels like you're being sold something, right? And then, have you ever met another person from another faith, and it doesn't feel like you're being sold something? Have you had an experience with like a Buddhist or a Muslim, and it just feels like they are just a religious person, and it's not something that they're trying to push on you or something they're trying to get you to change or see their perspective. They're just living their life, right? It feels different, and I think Western Christianity has not done a good job of letting people be themselves. I think they're trying to change or get them to commit to something so that they are a part of the system, and that's part of that scarcity mindset. I think if we can get out of this mindset where we have to feel like people need to be with us, or else our church is going to fall apart, then it creates a better environment, a healthier environment for people to grow and thrive, right? Let's see if I can get this back again. It keeps shutting down. It was fine when no one was here, and it's like the Wi-Fi doesn't want me to work. Okay, so I think we can make a different experience when we're not trying to convert people. We're not trying to change people. We just let them be who they are, right? When we can see outside of our own faith and humbly approach the world with curiosity and love, I think we can connect with other faiths and other traditions and break down some religious barriers that have been created over centuries, right? I want to show you another quick video from Cardinal Robert McElroy, who talks about interfaith dialogue.
In October of 1986, Pope John Paul II invited all of the leaders of the major religions of the world to come together in the historic town of Assisi for prayer, a prayer for peace. This event electrified the world, and it pointed to the deepest realities that constitute interreligious dialogue. Interreligious dialogue seeks to build bridges among faiths, to recognize that in the splendor of the human heart, across every culture and time, men and women seek to discern and understand the transcendent, and how it can be a blessing and a grace for them in their own lives and the lives of the human community. Interreligious dialogue recognizes that men and women find different pathways to the transcendent, and it understands that authentic interreligious dialogue recognizes the duty for us all in our conscience to be faithful to our own religious tradition in dialogue, and in that faithfulness discover the richness of other faiths and religions which bind us together, and also those elements which set us apart. Interreligious dialogue recognizes that at the deepest level of the human heart, we are called to be with one another, searchers in this world for the most important human questions that confront us. The question of who we are, of why we are here in this world, and ultimately, what is our destiny as men and women, living and beyond this life here on this earth. Interreligious dialogue is a recognition that the human family is bound together, not merely by common needs or by common traumas and tragedies, but much more fundamentally by a common understanding of the sacred dignity of the human person, which is rooted in the transcendent. For us as Catholics, the mandate for interreligious dialogue is found in the document of the Second Vatican Council entitled Nostra Aetate, which says that interreligious dialogue is an authentic effort of the Church to testify to the unity of the human family, to discern in all of the major religions pathways to the transcendent, to build bridges upon those common pathways, and to recognize the differences which exist and not to let them become barriers or sources of antagonism. In a very real way, the spirit of interreligious dialogue is found in the teaching of Pope Francis, who calls us all to a culture of encounter in our everyday life, meaning that we are called always to see in our relations with others an encounter of the heart and the soul, and a respect and a reverence for every man and woman who has been created on this earth. In that culture of encounter, in dialogue with other faiths, in theological dialogue, which is sophisticated, and in the dialogue of communities coming together in prayer and in service. In all of these ways, interreligious dialogue makes us one in our humanity, while recognizing that there are different pathways to God, which we always must honor.
So we have two Catholic perspectives on interfaith dialogue or exchange. Couldn't find a lot of Protestant perspectives on that, ironically. But did you notice in the video, do you think that he had a scarcity or abundant mindset when it comes to other religion? Abundant, right? Talking about multiple pathways. We're all trying to experience divinity or God in a specific way, in a certain way. I think that was beautiful. I think and that priest has done a lot of work. He was a bishop when that video was made in 2015. He's a cardinal now. Pope Francis has made him a cardinal because of his work with other religions, other interfaith exchanges. He's done a lot of work to help build bridges between different religions, which is beautiful work, and I think it's really needed in our culture. When I was in college, I was lucky enough to visit a Hindu temple in Los Angeles. I was there for a youth conference, and there's an opportunity to go you get on a bus and you go to this Hindu temple, and I went, and I learned a lot about Hinduism. I learned a lot about how their temples are set up. This temple was actually an old, I think, Methodist church that they converted, so it had a lot of similar architecture than Methodist churches that I've been to before, but it's been modified, obviously. And I think it was really interesting because I think I was a freshman or sophomore in college. I was pretty young, and I hadn't had any experience outside of my Podunk Little Baptist Church in Lima, Ohio. But to have greater experiences with these other religions was really helpful. And I noticed other people my age that were on the trip would sometimes, under their breath, maybe say something that was not kind about Hinduism while we were there, or maybe something they didn't like or disagreed with theologically. And again, that's that scarcity mindset. Like, these people are wrong because my religion is the right one. And you can see the damage that they can do in their own minds that destroys these bridges, right? So I think if you go in with an open mind, not willing, not saying that you're going to convert to Hinduism, but to go in with an open mind to see how other people live and see how other people experience culture and religion, it can be really insightful to your own faith, I think, and maybe see some gaps that you have missed in your own faith, right? So I think it's a good way to see other worlds without having to live in them, I guess. So I found a book that can help understand this. It's called The Impossibility of Interreligious Dialogue by Catherine Cornell, where she talked about 5 preconditions before you can have interfaith dialogue. It's something that we have to do within ourselves before you can go into these dialogues that I think is really important. So let's look at these real quick. There's humility, commitment, interconnection, empathy, and hospitality. So that's not exactly the way you think some of these words would be defined. It's a little different. So let me help you with what she means in her book. With humility, it's important to recognize the limitations of your own tradition. It's about doctrinal humility. It's about understanding that there may be holes or contradictions in Christianity that other religions may have solved in different ways. So it's going into these dialogues with humility, understanding that you are not the sole understander of spirituality. Does that make sense? That's going to prevent that scarcity mindset of approaching other religions as right and wrong. So with commitment, it's about being accountable to your own faith. So while also being open to other traditions. So the commitment is committing to your own faith while still approaching these dialogues. So it's usually people who have these dialogues with other religions are sometimes outliers or people who are frustrated with their own faith tradition. And I think if you go in with a commitment to your own, it's not about I'm seeking out other things. It's about a dialogue. It's just about having a conversation between other religions to have this cohesive, let's do this together kind of conversation. Does that make sense? Okay. And then what else? It helps the ambassadors who are doing this to return to their own religions and not be outliers or to reject their own tradition, like I said. With interconnection, it's about recognizing the shared experiences of other traditions within your own. So sometimes with Richard Rohr said in the beginning of the service, with mysticism or with the metaphysics, maybe there's some connections with Buddhism that Christianity has that we can notice, hey, we do something very similar to that, and we call it this. I think those are the things that we're going to find that our shared experiences are interconnected with other religions are going to help to build those bridges, right? And with empathy, it allows us to move just from the facts of so you can go online and study Buddhism, you can study Islam, you can study these things and know the facts about the religion, but with empathy, you understand why someone believes these things. And I think it helps us to understand why someone would maybe choose that religion or grow up in that faith and stay with that faith. Because religion is very cultural. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. Hospitality, the last one, is about accepting that there is, and this is probably the hardest one. I think she ends her book with this, is what I found online. Hospitality is accepting that there is distinct truth within another religion that may not be in yours and allowing it to reside outside of your own faith. So this is complicated. It's about, hospitality is saying that there's something in the religion that I'm having a dialogue with that is not in my faith. That is true. So it's not something that's I can understand why they would believe that. This is something that that is true about their faith that is not true about our own. Does that make sense? Kind of complicated. But it's a philosophical understanding. It's being humble enough and empathetic enough to understand that just because we have our faith in this box doesn't mean it's the only box, right? Okay. So it's about so through these preconditions, we can allow ourselves to commit to dialogues with other traditions and value them without trying to sell them on our religion, right? It's just about this morning I was talking with Emma and Dan about, was it about music? We were talking about music and how, how I grew up this way with music and Emma grew up this way with music, and I wasn't trying to sell you on a certain way or say my way was better, but we just grew up in different, she learned how classically trained for a little bit, right? And I just learned on my own, and then just kind of figured it out with guitar. But she played piano for a little bit and learned how to play notes and with numbers, right? You did it through numbers. I don't know how to do the numbers. I don't know the fives and the sevens at all. But we talked about the difference between that. And we weren't trying to change each other's mind on it. My way is not better than her way that she learned, but it's a different way to experience music. And I think with religion, it's the same way. We can talk about how we grew up in our cultures and learn from other cultures without trying to change each other. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's not an ulterior motive thing. There's no conversation about, well, maybe you should start coming to our church. It's about, it's just loving each other and learning about other cultures. It's making our world a little bigger and a little better. Yeah? Okay. So I want to move, so we've reframed our idea of how to view other religions and how reframing how we see other religions can help us to have conversation and dialogue. But I want to move a little bit farther and see if you guys can come with me on this. Let's talk about what if religions look a little different than even what we thought. So what if we recognize the divinity within other traditions as distinct and unique, while also seeing how they can match with our own religion? So, for example, if you were born and raised in Cleveland, and you're a football fan, you would be a Browns fan, right? If you were born and raised in Denver, you would be a Broncos fan, right? Is that the Broncos? I'm not a football fan. I'm going to assume it's still the Broncos. So I think religion is very much tied to culture in the family you were raised in. If I was born in India, it would be not an impossibility, but it'd be very unlikely that I would be born Christian, unless I was like a missionary family or something like that. I think, this changes the way that we see our religion, because we want to expand the gospel, right? That's what we were told. We have to like preach the gospel to everybody. But some people are born in a different culture that doesn't have the gospel, and I think when we can see the world as bigger than ourselves and bigger than our box, it can help us to see people differently. Because if you're seeing people as just, Broncos fans, then it's not so much as like, well, they're wrong because they're not in Cleveland. Well, how would they be Cleveland fans unless they have some kind of connection to Cleveland, right? Or they like the colors better. Why would you like brown and orange? It's horrible colors. So I think that if we understand that religion, it's not the same. Football and religion there's similarities, but they're not the same. But I think that if we understand that religion is very much tied to culture and location, just as sports teams can be, there's a similarity there. Does that make sense? Is that a decent analogy, or okay, all right, we're going to keep moving forward. Okay, so what if, instead of seeing different religions as distinct boxes that we confine our beliefs in, we see them as unique wells that dig up the divinity? Let me show you a picture. So what if different religions show us, like we build these wells to experience religion, right? We build these wells to dig up divinity or spirituality from the ground, right? And these different wells all come from the same source, but we describe them different ways. We build different wells to dig up the water in different ways. We can, maybe someone who pulls up the water with a rope, somebody maybe take a big spoon and get the water out. Or maybe we build a different shaped well. We use different bricks to build the well, right? What if religion is an expression of love and connectedness to humanity and the world around us, and different groups just built different wells to get water out their own way? Not saying I could be way off on this, but it's a what if. It's just a what if, okay? Does that mean that one well is worse than the other? No, because it's all getting the same water, right? It's just drawing it up differently. The same source expressed through different systems. So we have tend to create religious systems as boxes that need to fit in categories, right? Like you are a Christian if you fit in this box and follow these rules and follow these beliefs. But maybe it's just a different way of expressing it than someone else in a different culture. Maybe, right? Could our expression of God in spirit be the same or similar to that of other religions, but interpreted differently? I think Paul actually said something similar to this in Romans. We're going to read Romans 1:19 real quick here. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made, so they are without excuse. So this is, Paul in Romans is talking about the nature of God and how it's seen to people who may not be within your tradition. In Romans, he's talking about the Jews and the Gentiles, and how the Gentiles are without excuse for following God because God's made himself known, right? In nature, in the world around us, in people, and yet, just because it doesn't fit in our box the way people believe, the Jews got mad and the Gentiles got mad, and it was a whole thing. Anyway, the world is large, and I think Ohio can feel kind of small sometimes, right? So maybe we aren't 100% right with our faith, and I think that goes back to the humility of having the dialogues, right? We need to have humility and understanding that we may not be right with our faith. And maybe there's a lot we can learn from other traditions that can all help us move forward in a new way, to help us reframe it, right? Okay. So how do we move forward? There are some New Agey kind of movements that merge or combine different faiths together. In fact, historically, I found some research that in Asia and the Middle East, there was an emperor who took a couple religions that were in the town that he was emperoring, and there were people fighting about the different religions, so he just merged them all together and made his own religion, and he was, of course, the priest of that religion. It didn't go well, because I think sometimes when you merge ideas or you make things, you take ideas from other religions, it can be a form of colonialism too. It can be dangerous to absorb other cultures that are not your own, right? We've seen this with when Europeans came into North America. They wiped out entire cultures, entire civilizations. Indigenous cultures got wiped out because the larger, more powerful group came in, right? So we don't want to see that happen. We don't want to absorb other religions or merge with them because we have similar beliefs. I think that can be dangerous at times, right? It can be seen as washing away the uniqueness of different religions or cherry picking what you think you like best, right? I think there should be some structure and organization within religion, but I think it can be used as a tool rather than a box. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. I personally think that the source of the divine is connected through these, like the wells, like I talked about, different religions. I don't think washing away the individuality is helpful with all cultures. Religion and culture are distinctly tied together, and losing the particularities of a religion could lead to the erosion of a culture, and especially smaller, more indigenous cultures like we talked about. And also Christianity has a history of doing this. And even in Europe, with Celtic cultures and with European, like Germanic cultures, Easter and Christmas were both absorbed from pagan rituals. And there's a long history of Christians saying like, oh no, that means that's about Jesus, and we're going to take that now. So we'll take festivals and holidays and turn them into Christ-centered things rather than just letting cultures be what they are. We've got a long history of co-opting things to represent Jesus. And now those pagan traditions and those Celtic traditions are lost in some ways because they've been absorbed and changed as time goes on, right? So beginning with dialoguing with other traditions, even other churches, and finding common ground to work together and build community, it can help move us forward, right? If we're working together, even just our local churches, I don't think there's a lot of other religious organizations around here. There's a few, but I think even just the churches around us, if we're beginning to work together with them, to shake hands, to have dialogue, understanding there's differences, but that we want to work through the differences and maybe even have a common interest or maybe a common mission together, I think those are all good things. It's a way to forge together and to build trust and love in our community, yeah? I think there's a lot of needs in our community. And I think even at McKinley, we see that happen, where several churches work together to make McKinley happen. And so the churches may not all agree on all the same things, but they work together because their common mission is to help Willoughby. And I think if we have a common goal and a common mission, we can do that. There are so many religious institutions that have a long tradition of loving their communities well and meeting the needs of their neighbors. When we partner with other groups with love, we can accomplish the same goal despite our theologies. Starting with loving conversation and moving into allyship and support, there can be great change and progress made for the world when we work cooperatively. Showing up for our neighbors when disasters strike, when Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or other forms of hatred arise, when the needs of our communities are not being met through normal avenues, these are all great ways to build support and interfaith networks with groups around us. Then the walls that separate our well will begin to fade, and we'll see what the water for what it truly is. Let's pray. God, we thank you for today. We thank you for all of us that could come today to be a part of our service and our church together. We're grateful for the life you've given us and for our health and for our lives. We pray that as we move forward, we can seek opportunities to understand others and to see them as truly human beings that we can love and we can encourage and we can support, and to continue to build bridges with groups around us that have similar goals and similar interests so that we can make the community and the world a better place. Amen. Thanks so much for coming. We'll see you next week.